Good afternoon and welcome to all in the ongoing webinar series of Mizoram University. First of all, I would like to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Sambasiva Rao, to initiate this webinar series in this pandemic situation. He is sparing time with us, though he is busy with his tight schedule. Thank you so much, sir, for your presence. Then I myself, Professor A. Muthulakshmi, Head, Department of Public Administration, Mizoram University, and along with me, Dr. Irina, Assistant Professor, Department of Public Administration, who took initiative to organize this webinar. Then I would like to say some few words about our department, that the Department of Public Administration is one of the oldest departments in Mizoram University, which was established in the year 1985 under Negu Aizwal campus. Presently, including me, there are 4 professors, 1 associate professor and 2 assistant professors. Total, we have 7 faculty members plus 1 guest faculty. So we organizers, we welcome all the participants who are joining in this program from various universities, institutions and organizations on behalf of the Department of Public Administration. Today, we are organizing a webinar on Indian state, democracy and the citizen public policy challenges in the post-Covid-19 era. And our speaker, Professor Rumki Basu, is a well-known person in the field of public policy and governance. So before going to introduce our speaker, I would like to say few other things, the way we are going to conduct this program. That after the introduction of today's speaker, Professor Rumki Basu will start her presentation. So during her presentation, if the participants have any queries, please leave in the Q&A box below or type your questions precisely, not in the chat box. So then after the presentation, we will ask a few questions and we will ask to the speaker in the Q&A session, which will be followed by vote of thanks led by Dr. Arina, Assistant Professor, Department of Public Administration, Mizoram University. So after that, we will be ending this program with a formal vote of thanks. So now, I introduce briefly the resource person. Rumki Basu is a professor of public administration and former head of the Department of Political Science, Jamia Millia University, New Delhi. And she was also the director of the Sarojini Naidu Center for Women's Studies, Jamia Millia University. She is director of Women's Studies Center in Jamia. She was an instrumental in introducing MA in Gender Studies program in the Center for Women's Studies in the year 2015. And she also presented many research papers across the sea, and also she has published 12 books, and the latest books titled that Public Administration in the 21st Century, and the other book, Governance in South Asia, has been published by Routledge Publications. And then see 40 articles on issues of public policy and governance, international organization and the political economy of development in India. And also her books and articles have been published by Macmillan, Sage, Francis and Taylor, Routledge and Springer. And she has received ICSSR Teacher Fellowship Award. And also she was awarded that Bharat Jyoti Award in the year 2013 by the India International Friendship Society. And she is not new to our university. She came to our university twice for official duty in various capacities. So with this introduction, we warmly welcome Professor Rumki Basu to deliver lecture. Ma'am, this is your turn. Please you take over, ma'am.
First of all, I would like to thank the Vice Chancellor, Professor Sambasiva Rao, for initiating this timely and relevant series of webinars in Mizoram Central University, which gives teachers and scholars from all over India and abroad an opportunity to present their views and interact with a wide audience. Thanks to the rediscovered strengths of technology in the post-Covid-19. Thank you, Professor Rao, for being with us to inaugurate the present webinar, despite your busy schedule and other assignments. Next, I'm indeed grateful to the Department of Public Administration, Mizoram University, Professor Muthulakshmi, the head, Professor Srinivas Badi, Professor Lal Rintuanga, Professor Lal Nezovi, Dr. Lal Tanpui, Dr. Babu, and last but not the least, my dear student and research scholar, Dr. Irina, the organizing secretary of this seminar. It was Irina and Dr. Muthulakshmi's infectious enthusiasm that brings me to this forum today. Besides, I have many cherished memories of my 2 visits to the department and my stay in your beautiful campus and the interactions I had with students and teachers of this university some years back. In fact, I would love to go back to your university when things normalize. Now, let me move on. I have an hour or so to speak, so I will move on straight to the theme of my webinar. The Indian state, democracy, and the citizen, public policy challenges in the post-COVID-19 era. 2020, and I say this with a great deal of emphasis, will be a turning point in world history. It is a witness to the best and the worst in human ingenuity, governance, capacities, and what public policy can or not do in crisis situations, in a globe fraught with uncertainty, inequality, violence, and disasters, all of which get exacerbated during the period of the pandemic. The USP of the corona crisis was that the entire world was caught in a once-a-century act of sailing in the same boat at the same time. As it happens in times of crisis, the fragilities and the strengths of governance capacity systems are laid exposed. In the post-COVID-19 era, rethinking regimes, governance capacities, and public policies of states have become imperative because despite globalization, every problem is essentially a national problem, which states have to solve or address, keeping its citizens in mind, at least in democracies. To give an example from India, the corona crisis was consistently looked at as a lives versus livelihoods issue, where the government had to impose lockdowns to save lives first and ease them out later to save livelihoods. Both these decisions were serious public policy issues left in the hands of the central government. Revamping the public healthcare system was another necessity which the ruling regime had to address. If migrant workers lost their jobs in the informal sector during the lockdown and wanted to go back home from their places of work in different parts of India, providing them with food and transport facilities was considered the government's job. Ensuring food security to the poor during times of distress or otherwise had traditionally been thought to be the government's mandate. Providing incentives to the private unorganized sector, the largest employers in India, so that they could keep their businesses going was also considered the government's business. This is just to give a brief idea of what the people in the world's largest democracy with the 800 million electorate felt the government should be doing in times of crisis. Perhaps this is what is expected of the public sector in all underdeveloped or developing countries anywhere in the world. Such is the dependence of the public on the state that it would not be wrong to suggest that developing governance this demand not only extraordinary necessary in both new and old democracies. The routine mandated tasks for India's development administrators in any case is heavy, but the extra efforts they had to put in for the corona period did seem overwhelming, but not entirely unexpected in the context of crisis situations that India has faced before. When India encountered its first case on January 30 in Kerala, COVID-19 seemed like some unknown infection in a corner of China that seemed to have created a scare of sorts. 5.5 months later, 1 million Indians have been infected and over 35,000 Indians are dead due to the disease. Therefore, India had to change in seminal ways. India's governance structure has confronted the most serious multidimensional crisis in its history. Its political life is on the verge of a potential transformation, both in form and substance. Its public health system has emerged as the most crucial determinant of the nation's capability to fight the pandemic and revive. Its economy has gone through an unprecedented slowdown. Its governing economic philosophy, interestingly, has shifted again to primacy of state initiatives. Private companies have been forced to reconfigure their business. India's labor force, incidentally, and I say this very forcefully, has gone through a humongous tragedy, more severe than the scale of human migration one experienced after the partition. India's poor have got poorer, and the middle class has seen opportunities shrink, jobs disappear, and incomes depleted. Its professionals have had to reconfigure the very idea of what it means to work from home. Students have been forced to adapt to a new education system where the online mode is the new normal. You and I are also learning to live with webinars and not face-to-face seminars. As the world grapples with the coronavirus pandemic, India had enforced the world's largest and most stringent lockdown from 25th March for almost 3 months with several other measures to contain the pandemic. It was during this period that the centrality of the Indian state was visible in the world's largest democracy. And it entered the issue of the centrality of the state, it entered the collective consciousness of its 1.3 billion citizens as never before. Covid-19 impacted the way the democratic Indian government, the 28 Indian states, the private sector, and the citizens behaved, seminally changing public life as we know it today. Ever since 1991, with the onset of new economic policies, the state market divide had changed irreversibly, with state minimalism and market-driven growth and development being espoused as the official policy of the Indian state. The days of administrative overreach and the philosophy of the welfare state seemed outdated in a globalized neoliberal era. Then suddenly, or so it seemed, with the March 25 lockdown, everything changed in India, and the state came to command the central heights again. COVID-19 was destined to place both the central and the state governments at the forefront of the response to the pandemic. Indian citizens were not looking to the private sector for any service they needed, be it food and essential supplies, medicines, healthcare, security, transportation, policing in lockdown zones, or even research for a new vaccine. For all of the real and impressive strength of India's private initiatives since 1991 in raising India's growth rates, given the scale at which this pandemic had to deliver a certain universalism of outcomes, private action couldn't be a substitute for government action at all. Rarely has the Indian state been put to test for its resilience, for its integrity, efficiency, decision-making process, and capabilities as it is being tested now during the pandemic. The centrality of the state is most acutely reflected in the healthcare system. People may have seceded from the realm of public services by turning to private services for health needs. But the pandemic has shown no one can truly secede from the larger public health system. It is the web of the health ministry, state governments, government hospitals in each district, government doctors and healthcare personnel, which has provided the first line of response. The private sector has chipped in, but even the conditions under which it can do so have been determined by public health authorities. This expansive role of the state also required new ways of doing official work, from the Prime Minister holding video conferences with chief ministers to the Cabinet Secretary convening a meeting of all chief secretaries digitally, from rolling out the Arogya Setu app to track infections to the deployment of officials from a range of departments for contact tracing. The state has had to adapt, embrace technology, divert its resources for the most urgent tasks at hand, and realign priorities. But through all of this, it has also become amply clear that the Indian state's capacity is woefully inadequate. Its investment in key areas which are central to its mandate, such as health, is way too limited. Its coercive apparatus has a tendency to go overboard, as during the enforcement of the lockdown we have seen. However, it is slow to respond to immediate needs of the most vulnerable citizens, migrant labor being the most recent example. However, having said that, let us look at some of the rediscovered strengths of the Indian state. One, the Indian state's capacity, its coercive arms, were found to be extraordinarily strong, efficient, and effective. Locking down an entire nation of India's population, size, or diversity was no mean achievement. The lockdown was a testament to the fact that when the state wishes to implement something on a large scale, curtailing the liberty of citizens for any purpose, this time, of course, for preserving public health, then what can emerge is a revelation. With a clear directive from the center in unison with the states, all departments and ministries, including the police, can deliver. So, if a democracy can turn into a hard state during a medical emergency, can its state machinery be used in a similar fashion as a tool of policy implementation in normal times? My answer is yes, even this can happen, as it has been proved in some administrative best practices when public policies were very effectively implemented by the politico-administrative machineries in different states of India. Then, can I argue a case for sustainable development goal implementation in India? Today, everyone knows the significance of SDGs as the minimum agenda for good governance anywhere in the world. I firmly believe that if the political vision and directives are clear, there can be 100% implementation of our SDG goals by 2030 in one Indian state after another, the center firmly holding the hands of the states. If we need to be a world-class power, our public service delivery systems need to be world-class too. The point I'm trying to make is that soft democracies like India can be turned hard with the requisite political will and purpose, and expected outcomes will follow. This brings me to the second interrelated strength. The lockdown could not have been as successful without the cooperation and support of the citizens. People, by and large, complied with all state directives, even when it severely hurt their livelihoods. People's participation is therefore a must for successful policy implementation. Effective political communication is mandatory too, something that Prime Minister Modi understands very well and was the raison d'etre of his television addresses during the lockdown period. He has been the only Indian Prime Minister so far who uses this direct mode, the radio or television, of communication, frequently bypassing other intermediaries. The Prime Minister has always launched his major welfare programs through a social movement mode, nudging the public for major behavioral changes in order to make public policies succeed. For example, Jan Dhan Yojana, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao are all social movements which can be turned into successful public policies. However, It is naive to believe that electoral democracy per se can generate immediate economic payoffs or reductions in poverty, which will transform the lives of people magically. What it can do is to strengthen electoral accountability so that politicians have strong incentives to deliver public goods and services according to citizen needs. Democracies can limit the abuse of power, but are often slow, deliberative, and procedure-oriented, unable always to deliver electoral promises efficiently or effectively. It is also true, and this is very important, which the point that I'm stressing, is that many authoritarian regimes in the world today, China, Russia, Vietnam, Singapore, and Saudi Arabia could be just some examples, who have also demonstrated high rates of growth with high levels of human development through enhanced institutional capacity to deliver public goods to citizens. Therefore, desirable development outcomes do happen in autocracies as well. Why should then citizens opt for democracy is the big question today. Democracies, to my mind, allow citizens to choose their rulers, express their demands overtly in the public domain, to hold public officials to account, punish the incompetent or corrupt, and reward the competent through peaceful means of incentivization. Democracies enable the public to participate in the policy cycle, which is the making, implementation, and review of policy, in more ways than one. Through the political process, which allows the freedom of speech, right to criticize, to dissent, to vote, or to be voted to public office. Therefore, democracy, state capacity, and public policy are interlinked, and there is a need to reinforce and strengthen each other even more if democracy is to become the leitmotif of the 21st century. Democratic deficit happens where people's expectations of democracy are far ahead of its performance. Unless specific democratic regimes have the capacity to deliver effective public goods and services, especially in developing countries or new and relatively fragile democracies, then democracy's legitimacy itself will be called into question. When we look at policy making and implementation in India, the greatest bane of the Indian state has been its underperformance, despite its vibrant democracy and trained civil service. Democracy has survived in India despite a low-income economy, widespread poverty, illiteracy, and ethnic diversity. Judged by developing country standards, India's greatest asset has been that it has been ruled by civilian elected governments throughout its post-independent history, with a competent civil service, which unfortunately has always underperformed and has never been answerable to the public directly. Unlocking India's potential and enabling it to take it to its position in the global arena will require above civil service to manage a country of such continental proportions. Here are some of the public policy challenges India faces in the 21st century. There are other issues, but let me come to the very outstanding challenges first. Number one, climate change. Unless India cleans up its rivers, its forests, and switches to alternative sources of energy, millions of its citizens will be at risk. India, like all other developing countries, is still groping for an ideal environment development trade-off. Number two, human development. India is one of the fastest growing economies, or at least was till COVID-19 happened, with the human development ranking of 129 out of 189 countries, which is poorer than some of the South Asian neighbors and even sub-Saharan Africa. Number three, infrastructure. India's public transport, waste management, power and communication systems remain erratic and poor in comparison even to other developing countries. Therefore, there is a need to rebuild a relationship of faith and trust between the state and the citizen. Given India's practice of democracy over the last 70 years, this can best be realized through institutionalized, statutory citizen entitlements, enabling a demand for reasoned answers from the ruling regimes and the bureaucracy. Now, let me come to examine federal practices today. Post-Covid-19, India's political system will be tested most particularly in its major constitutional feature, the federal division of powers. It is also important to remember the context in which public policies are made in India. A democratic politico-administrative system means that the flow of information is open and that there is a constant feedback system where criticism from the public, political opposition, domain experts, and the media can be constantly included in the making, execution, and modification of policy. Democratic policy making offers scope for incrementalism, mid-course corrections, and scope for public opinion and feedback. In other words, democracy allows scope for change with continuity and continuity with change. The government must see this as a strength and be open to criticism and inputs from all sources. For example, if the present ruling regime has been criticized for demonetization, being responsible for lowering the earlier growth momentum, shoddy GST implementation, the CAA and its role in creating societal fissures, failure to reignite the manufacturing sector to restart the growth momentum, or for the severity of the lockdown measures, it should take it in its stride. Constructive criticism helps to improve public policies in democracies. India has one of the sturdiest Right to Information Acts in the world, which is widely used by the public. However, a democratic system also, by its very nature, is slower and more deliberative. Finding quick solutions to structural issues, for example, a weak health infrastructure, is not going to be easy and quick. The pandemic has amply demonstrated the need and benefit of center-state coordination in policy making and execution. There is a complex division of powers envisaged in the Constitution, and public health, for example, is under the jurisdiction of states. Broad guidelines to deal with a health emergency like COVID-19 can be framed at the center, but the power of implementation lies largely with state governments, which therefore will have room to innovate and execute. The broad contours of the Indian state that has emerged after India globalized in the 1990s did lead to high growth rates. The era of economic planning and the administrative state, which was a hallmark of Indian democracy in the 50 to 1990 period, was too soon declared dead. India enjoyed rising growth rates, sufficient foreign exchange reserves, food security, and high rates of savings and investment till around 2017-2018. Around 300 million exited poverty in the last decade. We moved from relative poverty to relative prosperity. In this, the most important initiatives in good governance emerged from the 28 states of India. Niti Ayog's mandate today is to oversee the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals and promote competitive and cooperative federalism among states and union territories. To this end, it prepares a SDG India Index, which has become a good test of how the states are doing in all the developmental parameters. SDG Index is a powerful tool which offers excellent possibilities for the states to identify priorities which demand action, facilitate peer learning, highlight data gaps, and promote healthy competition among states. Let me talk briefly about what is called the Kerala model. Kerala is not among the richest Indian states, but has demonstrated by example that citizen centricity is the key to good governance and maintaining an efficient and effective public service delivery network is the resonator of democratic administration. Kerala spent 6% of its SDP on health infrastructure. Other northern and western Indian states with more COVID-19 cases in 2020 lacked the decentralized politico-administrative command structures, public health institutions, or effective public service delivery networks to handle emergencies like COVID-19 as Kerala did. With all its ups and downs, Kerala remains still the best model. India's per capita expenditure on health is 1.8% of our GDP, with a meager $16 per capita, one of the lowest in the world, despite apparent inequities regarding access to health care, 1.03 beds for every 1,000 persons. It is known, and this is interesting, that Indian doctors and its private healthcare infrastructure are among the best in the world. One of our biggest achievements has been keeping the death rate in COVID-19 to one of the lowest in the world. Among states in India, Kerala stands out because of its superior administrative capacities, its long traditions of public education and healthcare through public action. Social trust makes things easier, even when the state has to mastermind logistics in a pandemic situation. The people's right to information was respected by the government, and the people trusted government information and data. And this is very important. I'm saying this with a lot of thought. There was no opacity in government functioning, and this immensely helped in community outreach, rigorous contact tracing, and mass quarantine measures. The three-tier public health system set up to deal with COVID-19 involving government hospitals is the outcome of a more than 50-year legacy of spending on healthcare and education in Kerala. All of these policy measures have shown outstanding outcomes. You perhaps would like to know, but this is a fact. Kerala's first rank in both the Human Development India Index and the first rank in the Sustainable Development Goal India Index among the 28 states of India is a testimony to this. Kerala is right on track in meeting all SDG targets by 2030. No other Indian state can claim to make this happen so easily. Now, I'm happy to note that Mizoram, I would consider Mizoram a well-administered state with an annual growth rate of 10%, which is good enough to bring down poverty to less than 20%. It is second only, Mizoram is second only to Kerala in its literacy rate. In COVID-19 management also, Mizoram is doing well with 384 confirmed cases, 193 recoveries, and 0 deaths. That's an achievement. Thanks to Mizoram's community services, you could ensure a hunger-free state, especially during the COVID-19 period. The rest of India could emulate your literacy and community service model, which serves the majority of its citizens very well. In my personal visits to Mizoram, I observed how good and citizen-regulated so many aspects of governance are visible in Mizoram. For example, the traffic management system works so well in Aizawl because of community participation. This is what I mean by public and community participation in public governance, and Mizoram is a good example. However, your agriculture, your horticulture, handloom, power, health and transport sectors need more state investment to significantly contribute to growth and employment. In the last 3 decades, I'm reiterating this, it was our states which were at the forefront of our political and development reforms, whether it is public health, right to information, e-governance, right to employment, public service guarantees. All such initiatives have come from the states first, to be followed up by central legislation later. 80% of developmental expenditures are spent by and in states. In the COVID-19 efforts, it is states which led the fight against the pandemic by putting treatment protocols in place, ranging up medical infrastructure, humane treatment of migrant workers, by activating the existing laws. Kerala was truly a pioneer among states. In the post-COVID-19 era, it is the states who should push for bold structural reforms for growth and implementation of SDG goals to pave the way for a true welfare state in India. There is another reason to explain why states matter. The biggest bane in India today is what I call the phenomenon of differentiated citizen entitlements in different states of India. Let me explain this. For example, you might get access to a decent platter of public goods like food, education, and health if you are a resident of Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Mizoram, or Himachal Pradesh, to give some examples, rather than any other state in India. Narega is the world's largest employment scheme. The Food Security Act, guaranteeing food to 74% of Indians, is one of the world's largest public food distribution networks. And Ayushman Bharat is also the world's largest public health insurance program. Put together, they do empower large populations in India with substantive welfare benefits. But the only problem is that these schemes are not run with uniform efficiency or access, leading to a lack of universalism of outcomes in all states of India. A citizen is morally entitled to the same package of rights and basic public goods as another citizen. But that rarely happens in India. What divides is the quality and efficiency of governance of a particular state of India, where you may happen to reside, or in which sector you may choose to work, formal or informal. Today, when we talk of migrant laborers or migrant workers' rights, the debate figures around the issue that all citizens of India should get uniform welfare benefits from the government, for example, food or medical care, irrespective of the state of residence or sector of work. This was the logic behind the One Nation, One Ration Card scheme enforced after the Corona crisis. Time has also come to acknowledge the role of the state and the public servant in a population of 1.3 billion. Civil servants at the federal and state levels, close to 21.5 million, are managing or overseeing all that matters to an Indian citizen today. Education, healthcare, policing, communication, urban planning, transport, banking, and parts of industry. They are important because it is they who will manage the demands of a young and changing India in the future. A fact generally taken for granted in normal times, but certainly worthy of acknowledgement now in the post-COVID-19 era. Our bureaucratic structure, contrary to popular thinking, is neither too big nor too bloated for our needs. India has only 1.6 governmental personnel for every 100 residents, compared to the much higher figures of 3.3 in South Africa, 3.9 in Mexico, 5.9 in Brazil, 7.2 in Germany, and 10.1 in the UK. Increasing bureaucratic capacity to enhance their strength is to meet the needs of 1.3 billion citizens. It is a need, not a luxury. To move from a procedural to a substantivist democracy, more public action is required to translate public needs to public entitlements. Better implementation of public policies require more competent public institutions, not less. We must understand who needs the Indian state. The hallmark of a well-governed state is what it does for its citizens by way of public goods, services, and utilities provided. In India, for example, it is the marginalized sections of society who primarily rely on citizen entitlements through public service delivery systems. So let's strengthen these systems. Now, I would wish to examine the welfare architecture of the Indian state. A very crucial gap exists in the way the Indian state deals with its poorest citizens. Interestingly, it was the Modi government which brought in the debate about how we should deal with welfare through direct cash transfer to the poor, digitization of welfare benefits to plug leakages, and the need for movements and campaigns to raise public awareness through public action. Today, let me tell you this, 400 schemes come under the direct benefit transfer. The Modi government should use these well through the Trinity approach, Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, and mobile, to directly reach the beneficiaries and plug corruption and leakages. The Modi government's biggest mandate should now be to weave together a credible welfare architecture and execute it with efficiency and effectiveness in tandem with states so that it reaches every citizen who needs it most. The state should not only be fair, it should be perceived to be so. Narega, PDS, Right to Education, Ayushman Bharat have been good initiatives. What is required is making employment generation now the center of our political discourse. In democracies, the poor and the marginalized have one key advantage, the power of the vote. The time has come now to extend the right to work to urban areas, with municipal bodies being given the responsibility for providing 100 days work to all those seeking it. Lastly, COVID-19 has highlighted the need for providing universal free healthcare. Universal insurance coverage will not be enough. Raising the share of expenditure on healthcare to 3% of the GDP can ensure the right to health to all. A well-designed social protection architecture should not be seen as charity or financial profligacy. The pandemic has further reinforced the need for a welfare state. Identification of beneficiaries is entirely possible, and I say this with very forcibly, it is the identification of beneficiaries is entirely possible through existing databases. Schemes such as Narega, PDS, and a modest universal income transfer can drive growth by boosting demand, correcting market failures, improving credit access, and providing the income needed for people to invest in health and education. Contrary to popular imagination, I say this again with a lot of conviction, India is not a poor state. We have enough public finances to take care of our citizens by devolving these welfare benefits to those who need them most. Let us say, creating a true welfare state in India for a target group, that is, those who need these public goods and services, at any given point of time is not more than 300 to 400 million at a time. This, let us say, costs or would cost about 10% of our GDP in a given year. We were one of the world's fastest growing economies before COVID-19 happened. Today, we have slowed down like all other countries after the pandemic. But if we grow back again, there's no reason why we shouldn't. Then what is the direction in which our public policies should go? I'm absolutely certain that there is no worthier cause in democracies than moving towards the creation of a welfare architecture to ultimately build a viable welfare state for its citizens. To manage our vast human resources and truly reap the benefits of the projected demographic dividend, which we are constantly talking about, we need to plan for our 500 million workforce, 90% of whom are in the informal sector. Skill mapping of this workforce is extremely important, no doubt. There'll be workers needed for agriculture, for industry, and knowledge workers for the service sectors. Planning, skilling, and fitting our young mobile workforce in the economy with full respect to their skills and abilities, taking full care of their health and other workplace benefits is the only moral imperative of the Indian state today, to bring the private sector and the informal sector, which employ 90% of our workforce, in the ambit of labor laws and welfare benefits, will be the biggest challenge of the Indian state. The Indian state has been a model employer, no doubt, but it employs only a minuscule fraction, 2.7% only, of the labor force. Therefore, there can be no true human resource planning or management if labor and welfare law compliance is not enforced on the private and informal sector, where the majority of our labor force work. This brings me to the promise of bold structural reforms, which everybody is talking about, to regain India's growth momentum. I agree that bold reforms in areas such as land and labor are needed. But let us not think that laws are an answer to every problem in Indian society. Indian statute books are overflowing with more than 6,000 laws passed by the central and state governments. Only a fraction of them are possibly implemented in their true spirit. Take, for example, the migrant labor crisis that emerged as the biggest crisis in human migration in India since our independence in 1947 in the corona pandemic period. There is an Interstate Migrant Workmen Act 1979, where registration, regulation of employment, and conditions of service is mandatory by employers. During the pandemic, interestingly, it was found that except Kerala, no other state in India voluntarily complied and implemented the welfare provisions of the law. In line with the recommendation of the Second National Commission on Labour, the Ministry of Labour has taken steps now for formulating 4 labour codes on wages, industrial relations, social security welfare, and occupational safety, health, and working conditions by amalgamating, simplifying, and rationalizing the relevant provisions of the existing labour laws. This code has already been introduced in the Lok Sabha in 2019. And when passed, will subsume and replace 13 labor laws, including the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act. Even after this happens, let's see how and when the private sector will comply with these laws. Land in India is another tricky subject. Of all factors of production, the market for land is most distorted. Therefore, all changes have to come from the states. A catalyst for this change is increasing competition among states to attract investment. An essential requirement for a well-functioning land market is clear titling, which boosts the credit and sales market for land as well. It's been over a decade since the National Land Record Modernization Project began. The center should now handhold the states and back it with resources to conclusively clear India's titling mess. If states are taking initiatives in land and labor reforms and accelerating the reform process in agriculture, this is the best news ever for the agriculture sector. Bold reforms will also call for encouraging local production, build local brands, improve logistics, and lower energy costs for domestic companies. This will enable them to achieve economies of scale and technological sophistication for successfully competing in global markets with huge impacts on the manufacturing sector, because that's the sector that's not doing so well. You must know that. Besides, food and medical supplies, fortunately for us, are not in shortage. Livelihoods can be restored by initiating a massive public works program focusing on rural roads and housing, for example, which will provide a huge stimulus to the economy and revive growth. Everybody is talking of Atmanirbhar Bharat. Self-reliance was the leitmotif of policies pursued in India even in the 1950s, and the country industrialized quickly with least foreign aid. In the next decade came the Green Revolution, which set the nation free from food imports. We need to identify sectors like the mineral sector, the health and pharma sector, our textiles and agricultural products, which can also be world-class and competitive today in global markets. You have to nurture these sectors. Now let me come to China. In fact, in the post-corona world, the India-China comparison must be brought in when public policy challenges are the focus. China underwent some very bold reforms, which made them the manufacturing powerhouse they are today, enabling them to grow at 10% for almost 3 decades. But today, let me tell you this, their special economic zone-led growth model has been globally rejected. This was before Covid-19. It was rejected as environmentally depletive and labor exploitative, coupled with the complete lack of transparency. For example, its Covid-19 related responses in global fora or its expansionist foreign policy. Its incursions, I'm referring to its incursions into Indian territory recently. The authoritarian developmental model of China is far less attractive to India than it used to be at one time. I think we need no lessons from their growth model. India can demonstrate that eco-friendly, labor-friendly, humane, and democratic growth is possible. However, we can certainly learn a few lessons from China's human development record. Just 40 years ago, here are the facts for you. Just 40 years ago, China was at par with India in terms of life expectancy. By 2018, China had $9,770 per capita compared to India's $2,010 per capita. China's literacy is now 97%, and ours has just turned 74%. Its life expectancy is 77.6 years, as against India's 69.2. China's biggest success, however, to my mind, lies in taming poverty. In 1987, more than 66% of its population was poor, as against 49% of ours. Now, only 0.5% of Chinese are poor, while India's poverty headcount ratio is 21.2%. Both these countries nurtured domestic industry. I'm looking at similarities now. Let's look at the similarities. These countries, both these countries, India and China, nurtured domestic industry, focused on cost competitiveness, quality, size, scale, and adoption of cutting-edge technologies to enable global expansion. Therefore, the basic model of growth has been similar, emphasizing import substitution and self-reliance. China and India are the only two countries, and I'm saying this with a lot of thought, China and India are the only two countries even today which can survive import substitution. Their domestic markets are large enough to sustain their domestic production. Today, China and India are important icons of development through two different models. China is an authoritarian one-party state, and India is a multi-party democracy. Now, what I'm going to say next is very interesting. Francis Fukuyama, one of the greatest political scientists of our time, has recently clearly stated that despite China's impressive economic and military strengths, apparently superior to India, its model, that is China's model, is not exportable as a sustainable model to the rest of the world. This is Fukuyama. Both China and India will reach their goalposts, but India will go slower. However, Fukuyama insists democracy is the only sustainable model in the 21st century. Therefore, if I may add, let us not forget that the tortoise in our children's fables did win the race at the end and not the hare. That's a lesson for India. Therefore, It is imperative that we understand the potentialities of democratic public policy making and the execution process. The point to emphasize is that democratic functioning need not always be soft. The policy process can go hard sometimes without losing the quality and context of democratic spirit and power. Prioritization is absolutely necessary to plan a nation's future. State minimalism is not a virtue in itself. A nomadic like citizen welfare can be a moral imperative in a democracy in the developing world, where enhancing state capacity to continuously deliver to its citizens may be the only way to transit from being a procedural democracy to a substantivist one. The pandemic has shaped public discourse on key issues of public policy, which the Indian state will now be forced to respond. For citizens, livelihoods, public health, jobs with a degree of social security benefits, even in the informal sector, income support to the ordinary citizen in times of distress are now being considered as part of a welfare state agenda that should be prioritized in public policy making and implementation. If these now become if these now governs citizen-state relations in democratic India, then the country will certainly move towards a substantivist democracy in terms of citizen entitlements. The contours of such a welfare state seems to have finally entered the public consciousness as a byproduct of their collective experiences during the COVID-19 period. India has seen and understood, and emphasized this, the centrality of state power in this time of the pandemic. Citizens have come to realize that the same power can be used to bring seminal changes in our public policies and transform the lives of our citizens. Let state power, both at the central and state levels, be used. I mean hard state power be used to implement the SDG goals in every state of India. That is the minimum agenda of good governance in the post-COVID-19 era. Addressing inequality, I'm saying this with a lot of thought, please hear me through. Addressing inequality and reducing differentiated access to public goods and services is the biggest challenge for the Indian state in the post-COVID-19 era. I'm absolutely clear that we do have the public finances now to gift, and I say this, gift a welfare state to the citizens of India. That should be the most compelling need of the hour in India today. Let not lack of political will and bureaucratic incompetence sabotage the efforts towards it. It's absolutely necessary for democracies and democratic public power to succeed and deliver is the word, like a hard state, if I may repeat, if democratization becomes the leitmotif of public governance in the 21st century. In conclusion, what I'm suggesting is that in the post-COVID-19 era, all democracies need to renegotiate the relationship between state, society, and the citizen. National resources should be used to revamp public service delivery systems to fulfill citizen needs and entitlements with a sense of fairness and justice. Now, my final words would be the difference between the magnetic idea of real equality, however utopian, and day-to-day perceived inequalities is the greatest cause of democratic deficits in all democracies, old and new, and India is no exception to this rule. COVID-19 has only exposed all the fissures, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities of our society as never before. To address all of them will not be easy. Some can be redressed through short-term policies, but most of them require a long-term vision. That vision, and mark my words, that vision needs a societal consensus. that needs to be forged through democratic modes and techniques. These are some of the challenges for public policy making in the post-COVID-19 era, which I wanted to present before you today. Thank you for your patient hearing, and I would like to thank the Department of Political Science and Mizoram University once again for giving me an opportunity to present my ideas in this webinar. Thank you. Thank all of you once again.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for wonderful lecture. Now I am requesting our Vice Chancellor to give his comments. Sir, please. He's left, no? Is there? He's there. Yes. Sir, now I am requesting our Vice Chancellor to give his comments. Sir, please. Red line, no? It's not listening. Okay. You can leave.
You just say question and answer.
Yeah. Now there will be Q&A session. Will be led by Dr.
Your maximum number of participants, madam, more than 500.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you.
More than 500 participants are there.
Thank you. I'm honored. I'm really honored.
Yes, madam.
I must say.
Actually, what about this? The policies Government of India took about the MSMEs classification from 2 crores to 5 crores and 20 crores, and they changed several policies under public policy. They will also come, no, banking loans and other things. The system actually. What is your opinion about that, madam? MSMEs, how much benefit people are going to get that MSMEs classification from 2 crores to 5 crores? They changed it, no? What is your opinion on that?
I think in the present situation, what I observe is that none of the public policy pronouncements can be called stable or something that will not be changed or is in the nature of being irreversible statements. In this fluid corona pandemic situation, I do notice public pronouncements being changed almost every day. So the government of the day seems to be very unsure of some of these pronouncements and what its execution might lead to. Somehow I have a feeling that they are well-intentioned and will definitely, take care of the needs of the MSMEs to a great extent, because I've repeatedly been saying that the manufacturing sector is not doing well. I've also said that there happen to be employers in the informal sector to a great extent. 90% of our workforce are either in the informal organized sector or informal non-organized sector. And part of this belong to MSMEs. So therefore,
Yes,
if only
actually, I got a doubt, madam.
be a little more decisive. That's it. The public pronouncements and policies in this period are still very fluid, changeable, reversible, and that's creating a lot of confusion. But they're
Actually, I got a genuine doubt, madam, because I'm not really expert in this area. When public migration is going on with the industries, laborers and everyone, they are going to different places. And the industries classification is changing by the government to help the industries. But actually, when situation come into normalcy also, this labor comes back to the different places is also questionable now. And labor shortage will come to many industries, and technical labor who are trained also will be a big situation likely to be prevailing, no? Because they are migrating almost borders of the states, different states. And technical labor particularly will be availability is also going to be a big issue after the pandemic situation. If it is 3 months, 4 months, they can come back. But once it is 1 year, they will be settled in some other areas. And availability of technical labor for industries, particularly industrial belt areas, the labor availability will be a big problem now. It is what I foresee. Because I'm a science man, I'm not really aware of this, but I foresee that this technical labor who are going back to their places, coming back to the again to the industrial sector and manufacturing sector, and the trained manpower availability is going to be a big issue now.
My response to your observations is, I personally believe that the options before the labor force which went back home are so limited in their places of residence. It's only some kind of Nariga work which they are being offered there, 100 days work or so on, or whatever. The initial reasons for migrating still would remain. You know, they're getting much higher wages in the states where they migrated. And what is being offered today is some kind of emergency relief work in the states where they have returned. So after a certain point of time, could be 3 months, could be 6 months, this migrant labor force, which did migrate to other states for whatever the reasons, the same reasons would apply for their going back again. So I see a lot of migration happening, continuing to happen from or within or between states. And wherever wages are more, in whichever state working conditions of migrant labor are better or wages are more, they're likely to go back. So, you know, shortage of labor, the issues that are coming up will only be temporary. They'll again go back to the states because wages are almost double there. So why would they not go back?
No, everything we positively think and we hope everything is going to be good in soon.
Well, it will take time. I said there are no magic solutions. The government of the day needs to have a very clear vision as to what they intend to do in the short run and what is their vision for the long run. It's one question of recovering from the pandemic situation. So short-term relief measures will have to be taken immediately or maybe for a year. After that, they should not backtrack on the longer vision, which I think they can think about within 7-8 months or a year. So we should be back on track within a year.
I think there are many questions, madam. I will stop here because I genuine, it is not good for me to continue because there are many questions are there.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Over to madam, no, they can continue.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Ma'am, there are around 47 questions in the question and answer box. So how many?
I mean, I'm ready to be here for as long as you wish me to be there. It's up to you. Maybe at least half of them I could take. I don't know how much time I would require to answer them, but 47 would be, I think, a little too long. I mean, the session may have to be wrapped up earlier. So I leave it to you and your discretion as to how many questions, and if some of them may be repetitive.
Yeah. Okay, so I hope
overlapping or repetitive, you know.
Yeah. So the participant who posed a question, I hope they won't be disappointed if I don't pick their question.
But am I going to take them one by one?
Ma'am, you can also see the question and answer box there.
Maybe you could read up to 3 questions and then let me see how I respond.
Yeah, ma'am, the first question is from Moitri Day, and the question is, in the post-COVID era, the state is back in the forefront, which also means the role of public administrator have changed. Do we think we need to bring back the state, which was rolled back with NPM? That's the question from Moitri.
Let me give you a quick response. You know, the duties and tasks of, let's say, an IAS officer today remains pretty much the same as it used to be in earlier times, except it's been divested of some powers which have been given to local panchayats. Other than that, you know, his duties have only, you know, they've changed in nature, but not in terms of quantity. So I don't, you don't have to bring the earlier proactive state back in order to discuss the role of the public administrator today. I see the same proactive role of the public administrator today as it used to be earlier. There are just a few areas in which the work has shifted to other functionaries, especially at the district level. They have to share power with the locally elected district agencies. But the role for COVID let's say take the example of COVID-19 management. It was the district magistrate or the development commissioner whose office was the main coordinating agency for COVID-19 management at the district. So I don't really see a reduction of roles of the public administrator today. It's just a change in the nature of roles that's happened.
Okay, ma'am, the next question is, during COVID-19, India become unitarian rather than federal state. The idea of cooperative federalism pronounced so strongly by our Prime Minister under bracket when he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, bracket close, it's not practiced. What is your opinion? The next question is, do you think that, yes, ma'am. Yeah. And what do you...
Pardon, I couldn't hear the next question.
Yeah.
What was the next question? Yes.
Do you think the end of COVID-19 pandemic is synonymous with the end of globalization, beginning of post-globalization era?
You see, as far as federalism, center-state relations and federalism, or the concept of cooperative federalism is concerned, I think in any emergency situation, any constitutional emergency, whether in terms of war or a medical emergency, the command and control of major public policies and decision making and execution and so on, gets to the center back again. So therefore, what happened in COVID-19 management, you did see some kind of a unitarian state happening, where almost all public policy pronouncements at the macro level were being made from the center. But COVID-19 management also showed that the entire medical management of this disease had to go back, the center had to go back to the states. It was the states who managed COVID-19 really. The center was giving the macro instructions, but the entire management, and I also say it's not COVID-19, even development management, development or any kind of, program management, even of central laws, is done at the state and district level. So therefore, what we notice, or we are likely to notice, and which is a healthy trend, is of competitive federalism. Unitarianism is not going to come back. It might have happened during this period, but the broad controls were with the center in health emergency management. But public health is again a domain of the states. And the entire COVID-19 management, therefore we talk of the Rajasthan model or the Delhi model or the Kerala model and so on of COVID-19 management. They are the ones who really did it at the ground level. The next question, if I forget, what was the next one? Oh, yes, cooperative federalism, is wonderful. And I think you cannot have something like, let's say, Sustainable Development Goal implementation in India without the center and the states doing it together. That's very, very clear now. All these SDG index will tell you how differently different states of India, execute a particular central policy or even a mega goal, a global goal like SDG. So development has to be looked at in India through disaggregated data from the states. It's how the states develop. A lot of that will, will influence how India develops. And therefore, I was talking of role models, and that means competitive federalism. Yes.
Ma'am, the next question is, in the post-COVID-19 era, how will the government face the challenges of increasing food prices, rising unemployment, economic disintegration, and social and political unrest?
This is a big question.
Yeah.
So I'll take a little time. You know, food prices, spiraling food prices is an issue, no doubt. But let me tell you, you have to give fair prices to farmers. So open market prices, even if they go up, that will maybe ensure fair prices to farmers. But at the same time, you need a well-functioning public distribution system which takes care of the poor and the needy. And today, almost 70 to 75% people are assured of food grain, cereals, or whatever minimum is required under the Food Security Act. So I don't think we are not yet, we can't yet say, you know, we are a hunger-free country. But certainly, food production is sufficient, and food security can only be ensured through PDS, the public distribution system. The food prices, if they go up, they will only go up in the open market, and those who have purchasing power will buy from the open market. Okay. Next is unemployment. You see, unemployment has been an issue for the last 50 years in India. You see, a particular point that needs to be clarified is who provides jobs to Indians. 90% jobs are in the private sector, informal sector. 10% are in the organized sector, of which about 3% are provided by government. So 97% jobs in the future will obviously need the economy to grow. With a boosting economy, more jobs will grow in the informal sector, again, private sector. That is where we need jobs to reduce your unemployment problem. Government certainly will not get jobs. Maybe 5% of Indians can be in the government. The rest of the jobs will come from the informal sector. And that is why I say that law compliance, you know, by the informal sector has now to be ensured by the government through good labor laws. Whatever laws, they have to comply, the private sector has to comply with these laws. But India was one of the fastest growing economies before COVID-19, till at least 2017. So maybe a year later, one can really see, you know, the economy growing back. We need at least 7% growth rate to generate the jobs we need to reduce unemployment substantively. And that may happen. And we are optimistic that the World Bank reports say that that's going to happen after a year. So if India grows back again, then unemployment will be reduced. Now, agriculture is doing well, you know, which is a surprise. But somehow the reports that are coming in from the economy says agriculture may be the backbone of our economic revival. The manufacturing sector is not doing too well. And so all the government subsidies may go to the manufacturing sector now. Agriculture has already received a lot of subsidies. So post-COVID-19, you need to grow between 7 to 10% at least so that India can get back on track and globalize. Yes, the question about globalization. Globalization will continue. We are living in a globalized world. So therefore, Prime Minister Modi had to clarify that Atmanirbhar Bharat is not the same as import substitution of the earlier era. In a globalized world, Atmanirbharta means that your products can compete globally. That's what he meant, that we need to be self-sufficient, self-reliant, and we need to have Indian brands which can compete globally, which of course will do, which makes manufacturing sector competitive in the world. So I don't really see a reduction in the global scenario, in the economy, the developments that were taking place before COVID-19. We will be on much the same track once again.
Ma'am, the next question is, what are your views on the role of opposition in India, keeping in mind its present condition?
I didn't get the question.
What are your views on the role of opposition in India, keeping in mind its present condition? Role of opposition, ma'am.
Yes. You know, my entire lecture here today was about democracy. We've had 70 years of a procedural democracy. We followed the procedures correctly, except a short period during the emergency. And today, since 2014, there has been a lot of talk about institutional decline and India moving towards an illiberal democracy, which again is a global phenomenon. And it's the same era where we see the ascendance of the right and the right ideology always being a little more illiberal. Therefore, everywhere in the world, you will see a resurgence of right, and with that, illiberalism coming in, majoritarianism coming in, and decline of democratic institutions and freedoms. I do agree this has happened also in India, but somehow our 70-year-old track record makes me believe with a lot of conviction that we will continue to remain a democracy. We will continue to have our elections, and the opposition needs to put back its act together and go on speaking and making noise about all the issues that they don't like about and they are also speaking about today. I mean, I think the opposition is not making electoral gains. That's right. In elections, you don't see much magic happening and the opposition losing out very often. So they may not be making electoral gains much. We'll see, they may come back again in a big way or a small way. In different states, it's one scenario. At the center, it is another scenario. We've had one party dominated democracies. We've had coalition-led democracies. We now have a democracy which is talking in terms of majoritarianism. So all of these trends in democracy will be visible and are being visible even in India. But the point I'm trying to make is in 21st century, believe me, and I see this with a lot of conviction, and a lot of political scientists are speaking on this, that despite illiberalism, despite the triumph of the right, despite the temporary triumph maybe of majoritarianism and so on, you cannot, the only sustainable model of political consolidation, the only sustainable model which ultimately will sustain in 21st century is a democracy. So what is happening in India, you don't see electoral gains being made much by the opposition. That doesn't mean democracy won't survive in India. Democracy is self-corrective, and democratic public policy making, I spoke a lot on it, that how you can make mid-course corrections, you can, do and understand the public psyche. And what is required in India is that welfare architecture I was talking about, universal minimum income, welfare architecture. Not that the ruling regime agrees on it. Much of it, the ruling regime is not agreeing on it, but they also have to face elections at the end of the day. So, you cannot ignore that the power of the vote in the last resort can be extremely powerful. Let's wait and see what happens in India. I'm optimistic as far as democracy is concerned.
Ma'am, next question is, as land pooling policy gradually taking land from poor farmer at much lower rate than the market value for expanding cities, what should be the ideal approach to make it win-win situation for both parties?
You're talking of farmers, right?
Yes.
Are you talking of farmers?
Yes. Yeah, taking land from farmers.
Yes. I do believe that what farmers required, because of the seasonal nature of their income, some kind of income supports, greater subsidies, better prices, all of which the government of the day did attend to in bits and pieces, but somehow I think the agricultural sector, the reason why it's doing well today, much of their woes are being, or their problems are being taken care of, like agricultural credit, agricultural marketing, agricultural subsidies, better prices. I think I will not be able to go into detail. Much of that is being taken care of. So as a result, I would say agriculture is doing better than manufacturing or other sectors. And during the COVID-19 period, the only silver lining comes from the agricultural sector because they've had a bumper crop, a good season. And, we do not have food shortages at the end of the day. That's very, very important. They need, and the workforce in agriculture is steadily declining. So those who are there already in agriculture, you have to make it a profitable, a job for them. So that the government of the day, I think, understands. They are more confused about how to revive the manufacturing sector. They are less confused about agriculture. So as a result, agriculture is doing better.
Ma'am, next question is, what is your view on PPP model in India? PPP model in India.
Well, it hasn't been doing as well as it was expected to do. Somehow the question is about controls. The public sector wants to control. They want the money to come from the private sector. And once they have built whatever they want to build with private money, they want private sector to vanish and they'll take the controls. So as a result, there's a lot of issues where a PPP is working. Some places it's not working. In infrastructure, for example, everybody thinks that PPP will work well. It's been reasonably doing well. In the health sector, it's reasonably doing well. In the education sector also, it's reasonably doing well. It is the future. In this sector, if with proper laws, you need proper legislation and a proper working memorandum of who will do what, how profits will be shared, and how controls will be shared. That is the big issue. So I see that the PPP model has future. Definitely it has a future in some sectors, but especially in infrastructure, health and education, I do believe PPP can do better than what it has done now. But so far, it has not been very promising because of these issues.
Ma'am, I'll put the last question because as we are nearing to 4 o'clock, the last question would be, how can the Indian civil services be empowered for the post-COVID performance?
We have been talking of civil service reforms for the last 50 years. I think at least 500 commissions and committees have been looking at this issue. There are reports and more reports at the state level, at the central level, which are talking of civil service reforms. I personally believe that there was this, a misconception that there are too many bureaucrats around, that there are too many government servants around. In my lecture, I was very clearly pointing out that, the government sector is a very small sector in India. It's only 2.7% of the employable workforce that is in government. So it's a wrong impression that it's big and bloated and government spends so much on its salaries and it's never doing its job. I truly believe that you can have a much bigger government sector and much better focused mandates be given to them. Let them cooperate with other sectors at the district level, the NGO sector or the panchayat sector. Government cannot do it all alone. You need to outsource some of your activities to the private sector or the NGO sector or whichever sector you want. But certainly the developmental sectors, you can't outsource them to the private sector. So basically, world over, if you want good public service delivery systems, and it is, mind you, good public delivery systems distinguish between a developed country, a developing country, and an underdeveloped countries. If you have very good public structure in public sector infrastructures, if you have very good public service delivery systems, good public education, good public healthcare systems, you know, that is the hallmark of a developed state. So you need to make more public investment on, you know, on the public sector, and increase the number. There's no problem. And at the end of the day, all the, you know, successful mega or mini or whatever development programs at the micro level, at the state level, district level, whatever successful government programs we've had, it is because of the public servant acting in unison with the politician or the government or the ruling regime. So what is really required is the requisite political will. And I keep referring to politico-administrative machinery, which means all your mandate, make it focused. You have the money. There is no question of lack of public finances. You know, that's something I wanted to emphasize, that this constant talk of government not having money is all rubbish. Government has the money. Public finances are there. Even district administration has enough money. Panchayat administration has enough money. State and center, you know, and there, of course, the finance commissions have seen to it that whatever distribution of revenues is done pretty fairly. So with all of that, what you require is a clear mandate and the political regime holding the hand of the bureaucrat or the civil servant, giving clear instructions, like SDG goals have to be fulfilled by 2030. That's it. That's the minimum agenda of good governance in India today. And report after report of monitoring and review is required. It's not setting goals. You require finances. You require the hand-holding of the ruling regime with the bureaucrat. You need implementation, review, and you need to monitor the review at every stage. And you can have extremely successful public programs. That's why I said the centrality of the Indian state is proved not just by emergency, public emergency management. The centrality of the Indian state means building up the capacity, the institutional capacity, and the executing capacity of the Indian state to be able to deliver in normal times. That is entirely possible. And to my mind, state after state should now focus on implementing SDG goals. That is good enough a mandate for the next coming few years. And there's no question of not having money. I'm repeatedly saying that. You do have the money.
Okay, ma'am, I've come to the end of this question and answer session. Since our time is coming to an end, I'll be giving the vote of thanks. So it is my honor and pleasure to give this vote of thanks. I, on behalf of Department of Public Administration, would like to thank Professor Rumki Basu for giving us the opportunity to listen to her wonderful lecture. I would also like to thank our University Vice Chancellor, K.R. Simba Rao, for supporting our initiative to have this webinar. I would also like to thank Mr. Suraj, System Analyst, and his ICT support team here in MJTU, and all the participants and the department faculties and staff in the Department of Public Administration for all the supports to make this webinar a grand success. Lastly, dear participant, your e-certificate will be mailed to all your registered email ID. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you
Thank
all.
you so much. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Absolutely.
Thank you.
One thing, there was 1,182 registration for this webinar, And since we have the maximum limit for only for 500 people, so we could accommodate only 500.
Yeah.
So we have disappointed many also. Many more wanted to listen.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, this has been absolutely overwhelming for me. I don't think I've done a webinar of this nature, sort, scale. I'm really very, very pleased, very honored by the overwhelming response. I hope my whatever I said made some sense to you, and probably some of the points that I raised you could think about, and give me a feedback on what you think about these issues that I raised today. Thank you so much. Thanks to
Thank
all
you,
participants.
everyone. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all
you.
participants.
Participants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.